Hi, and welcome to URP 475, where we're continuing our discussion on housing. And in this section, we look at slums. What is a slum? There is actually a definition for it. A group of individuals living under the same roof that lack access to safe water, sanitation, secure tenure, durable housing, or lack of durable housing, insufficient living area, resulting in crowding or extreme crowding. Secure tenure basically means that you're living in something that resembles a house, but you're not really paying rent for it. Or if you're paying rent for it, it's unclear that the person you're paying rent to actually owns that house. So you have a lot of risk there because you may be paying rent to somebody who is claims to be the owner of the slum, and uh, this person can be a slumlord, who owns a large number of these dwellings, or at least say they do, a headman, somebody who represents a slumlord, or some type of small scale landlord or self-help landlord that is renting out, a room or small homes. And in either case, people who live in slums, and slums really exist in developing countries, don't really have security of tenure. And in many cases, they might also be living in housing that is very low durability or made out of materials that are not what we would typically build houses for. So here I give you some examples of pictures. What slums look like in different parts of the world. South Africa. This is actually not as bad as some other areas, like in India. You have bricks and some type of cement or mortar finish. Um, Kenya, again, you have the same corrugated steel roofs, makeshift housing. Very low density though compared to, for example, Brazil. This is the favela in Brazil built on the mountaintop. Many of these homes are actually made out of cement or concrete or brick, but they have very low security of tenure because it's unclear who actually owns the land. Where these favelas, these homes are built. And in many cases, the government will come in and just clear them out once in a while because these are also notorious hotspots for, and this was profiled in a movie called Children of God, maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago, something like that. An excellent film if you want to check it out. But it really documents the lived reality, sort of the chaos of these favelas. Philippines, this is near some kind of water body, very makeshift housing made from materials that are not really durable, right? Hong Kong has one of the highest per capita incomes in the planet, but they do also have slums. And India, which has the largest number of people living in slums. And here you see a sewage pipe, presumably, and you can see how non-durable this is, right? Like in any kind of bad weather, like rain or earthquake or something like that, or high winds, would really knock these buildings down pretty easily. And another example of a slum in India. And this Calcutta as well. It's actually the area near where I grew up in. Uh, Again, near a kind of a temporary water body, and so people are not only living near a in a very unsanitary environment because all kinds of waterborne diseases can be found here, but their homes are made out of materials, mud, thatched roofs, straw roofs, corrugated steel, make bamboo, tarp, those kinds of things that are very non-durable in nature. So, how many people live in slums? These are some rough, estimates. We estimate that maybe roughly 2 billion by 2030 will live in slums if things go kind of the same way they're going right now. Um, in developing regions as a whole, 1990 it was 656 million. In 2010, about 827 million. You say about a billion people. And the largest chunk of these are in South Asia, which is again India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, 190 million or 200 million right here. Sub-Saharan Africa, which is a bunch of different countries in below the Sahara, another 200 million. And then Eastern Asia is it's like China primarily, and then Southeastern Asia, which is like Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, and so on. So lots of people, living in slums. These are in the hundreds of millions, just to give you a sense of the size here. And this is the percentage of people living in slums. So even though lots of people in absolute numbers are in India, for example, Bangladesh, Pakistan are living in slums, they represent roughly a third of the population there. In sub-Saharan Africa, though, The numbers are about the same, 189, 190 million, but the percentage of population that 190 million represents is much larger. It's nearly two-thirds of people in sub-Saharan Africa that are living in slums. So why do slums? So this has everything to do with globalization and the resulting immigration, right? Why do slums exist? Globalization and the resulting immigration from rural parts of a country to urban areas. Um, People move to cities, right? Because cities are the centers of the economy in the modern global capitalized world that we live in. Um, and so as people are moving to cities, many of these cities in many parts of the world are simply unprepared for the influx of people that are coming into the cities. People in cities tend to be wealthier. On the other hand, there's not enough housing for all the new people who are coming in, so they end up in slums, and they end up living in in squalor in areas that has very low durable housing, where their land tenure is insecure. They're living next to poor uh, infrastructure with respect to water, no water or consistent water supply, electricity, and so on. But in the end, they would still, particularly young people, would rather live in a city because of the greater opportunities in a city. Um, Here I give you some other reasons why slums exist, but the reasons are all interrelated. Um, in a rural area, people can sometimes build their own house because house land is more abundant, population density is less. But in urban areas, particularly in developing countries, the land is very scarce, and you have to buy it on the market, right? So slums will grow up in areas, will rise in areas where no one wants to live, or in areas where slums already exist. So some of the biggest slums, Kibera in Kenya, or Dharavi in Mumbai, in India, these are in major cities. But on the other hand, they are in parts of the major cities where nobody wants to live. Although in the case of Dharavi, there has been some attempt by developers to kind of reclaim that land so they can develop it into actual more expensive housing. Dharavi would be kind of like if Central Park in New York became a slum. Just to give you a kind of a picture, it's kind of like that. It's kind of centrally located in Mumbai, which is the largest city in India economically and population. But because it's been a slum historically, people move there. That land is not really can't be used for higher income housing. The type or multi-story high rises of the kind you see in New York or in Mumbai as well. Here are some other reasons for why slums exist. Again, why can't the poor who are moving, buy homes? Or well, they can't buy homes because none are available. The housing stock, the housing that does exist in cities is primarily geared towards people who are much wealthier. And that's the irony. And this has happened in the U.S. as well. You can think of a city like Irvine, for example. Now, we don't really have slums in Irvine, but we have poor areas and rich areas in the U.S. The city of Irvine, very high housing cost, but the people who work there during the day in retail and food industry and so on, many of them cannot afford to live there. So where do they come from? They come from surrounding communities, Anaheim, Santa Ana, where you have much lower cost housing, or you have poorer quality housing stock. And so these folks make the journey into Irvine, thereby increasing congestion because Irvine does not increase the amount of affordable housing that it has. And they also have to bear, higher transportation costs because of the fact that they can't live close to where they work. So they make it more inconvenient for other people as they're coming into work in Irvine, increasing congestion, but they also have to suffer disproportionately, uh, increasing commute time as well as costs associated with that commute. And a lot of this can be addressed by affordable housing. Same thing applies to major urban areas in developing countries. There is no such thing as affordable housing in many of the cities in developing countries. There are slums, and then there are homes for people who are upper middle class or upper class. There's no housing finance for the poor, right? Earlier we talked about, how you can get a loan to buy a house in the U.S., right? None of that exists in developing countries. And the immature legal frameworks Uh, and I give you an example of Central Africa, where only 1% of the land has been surveyed and titled. Titling basically means you kind of cut up a piece of land and say, hey, this is the dimensions of the land, these are the boundaries, latitude, longitude, and this is the parcel of land that can be bought and sold. And title tells you who owns that land. To do that, you have to survey the land. So, the U.S. and other developed countries, and even China and India have done a lot of surveying because if land is going to go up in value, people can own it, transfer it, and build on it, and so on. It has to be titled. But in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa, Central Africa, the example I give you here, land is not titled because it's not been surveyed. Okay, here we're going to end by looking at what can government and policy do to address the slum issue, and there are lots of different things, and they're all related to why slums exist. Well, the biggest thing government can do is actually acknowledge that a problem exists and be proactive with respect to their housing policy. The other thing that government can do is they can encourage development of formal housing markets, right, for all tiers of or all groups of people, not just the rich or upper middle class, but for middle income, lower middle income, and the very poor. Formal housing market, so people can enter the market, and as they become wealthier, they can go up in the housing market. The government can provide security of tenure. In other words, they can survey the land and title it properly, so people know who's on the hook, basically, who owns the land. And they can enable local actors, nonprofits, non-government organization, and local citizen assemblies, basically to identify housing and land-related issues and help address them. In many cases, groups do come up informally in developing countries because the need is there, but without government support and intervention on the behalf of these groups, they have very little power, right, to identify and serve the needy, provide microfinance for housing and infrastructure investment, which of course, really the only entity that can really provide massive infrastructure investment is the government. Government can also improve existing housing standards. There was a time I used to post a slide on the program the Mexican government had called Piso Firme, where they basically poured concrete on dirt floors to decrease the types of diseases that are associated with non-cemented, non-concrete floors. And so a lot of different scope for reform, land and housing reform, but the thrust has to come for this kind of regulatory reform from the government. The actors who are impacted by this, people who live in slums, they are often at the bottom. Not often, they always are at the bottom of society. They have the least amount of power, and so this is an area that the government can really get involved in and make a change. But unfortunately, in many cases, there's very little incentive to do so because the people who helped elect the government or keep the government powers in developing countries are, sometimes it's even less than the 1%, but they are at the top of the economic hierarchy, and they have no incentive to address slum-like conditions because the slums provide a cheap labor pool to these folks. And in many cases for politicians, and this is true especially in India, slums will provide a vote bank. So politicians will go out to the slums and say, "Oh, we're going to improve, living conditions and whatnot." And people, remember, one vote, one person, whether you live in the slum or you're a rich person. So the slums are a rich vote bank. These politicians will make promises they don't usually keep, but they have a large constituency within the slum. Okay, in the next section, we are going to venture into public health, and you have some postings now that look at the nexus between public health and slums. As I had mentioned earlier in this lecture, some slums are often located in very poor sanitary conditions, so diseases are absolutely abundant, pervasive in these areas. Waterborne diseases because they don't have good sanitation. You will have, very poor waste management. Again, so you have, fecal matter that is contaminating water supply that people are directly in contact with that leads to diseases. And then in slums, you have very poor people who have very little access to healthcare who are living next to each other, so diseases spread like wildfire. So there is a enormous health burden in slums throughout the world. And this is profiled in a few of the PDFs that I have posted.